It's hard. There is no two ways about it. I remember in those first few months after the breakup, you go through all the emotions, rage, um, you know, and I was,
Denial.
my goodness, all of it, right? And Chantal, I was not on social media at that time when we broke up, and I haven't been on social media for a while.
Yes,
You
I
know that.
remember.
Yeah, and I only recently joined social media once again. But I am so glad I was not on social media because the things I would have fucking posted had I been on, I would have regretted to this day. So I'm glad those thoughts stayed in my head and did not get transposed to any kind of digital footprint. Oh my God. No, that would have been horrific.
Hello and welcome back to Blending and Mending. On the podcast today, I've got a very special guest, my old friend Joash, and we go way back in terms of our employee wellbeing days. But Joash is joining the podcast today, almost wearing two hats. So he's going to be sharing parts of his story with us today, and we're going to delve into understanding the impact of compromise in relationships,
Mhm.
but he's also going to talk through his journey in terms of coaching and support and how that well-being lens came back in, just from a recovery and a support perspective. So, Joash currently is a global health leader. He was part of South Africa people. He lived in Johannesburg with us, and he is now currently living in Seattle. So, Joash, I am so chuffed just to have you on the podcast with me today. So, thank you so much.
You're welcome, Chantal Blandon de Chalane. It's so great to see you again and to read.
Joash Narainsamy. I can't believe I can't say your surname. Oh gosh. So,
It's a
friend,
journey.
let's get started. Um, I mean, we've both been a part of each other's lives through social media, so keeping in touch and just checking in terms of what's happening and where are you now and what's
Yeah.
going on. But I know that for a very long time, you were in a very committed relationship with someone that you cared about very, very much. And
Mhm.
when we connected last week, we spoke a little bit about that relationship and the 13 years that you guys were together. So will
Yeah,
you share some more with us in terms of that relationship and what
of
happened?
course. So I was in this relationship for 13 years, and for the most parts, if I had to chalk it up to numbers, I'd say for 95% of that time together, it was a phenomenal relationship. I was really lucky to find someone that I loved unconditionally and who loved me unconditionally. Um, but part of the thing about being in a relationship for that long was I started off pretty young. I was, I think, about 25 years old when we met,
Okay.
and he was also my first relationship. And Chantal, this is the key. This is the key here right now, is that it was my first relationship. And because it was my first relationship, I had no blueprint, I had no template for what a relationship should look like, how I should show up in a relationship, and what I should ask of a partner, what I should expect of a partner. And being someone who was young and impressionable, who at that time was very much a people pleaser, and thank goodness that is long gone. But in your 20s, you're a lot more open to being a people pleaser. I did whatever it took to make him happy, which fulfilled me at the time. So it's not to say that it didn't. But then there came a time when it didn't fulfill me, and where I had to start thinking about what my needs were, and were my needs being met in this relationship that's still pretty loving and caring and all of those things. So I found myself very early on in the relationship needing to compromise on things which I didn't realize at the time were fundamentals, whether that is how I want to be treated, or more so how I am treating other people. I was not the best partner in that relationship at times. I found myself being dismissive or not really seeing him for who he
Mhm.
is. And I take full ownership of that. But it was also because I just didn't know enough about myself. And so I had to go through that journey um, to figure out who I am. So after 13 years, I made a very difficult decision of leaving that relationship. It happened when I was 39 years old, and I would hate to say it was a midlife crisis, but everyone on the outside looking in will say, "Oh my God, that is such a midlife crisis decision." But I would like to think it was not. And I had to then go on this journey of discovery, discovering who I am, what is it that I want, what do I not want in a relationship, how do I want to show up, and how do I want someone else to show up for me in that relationship. It took me the better part of 3 years, Chantal, to really process all of those things, to figure out, uh, who I am and how do I be the best person, the best version of myself. And I went through everything. I was a certified hoe during those three years of getting over someone, because they say to get over someone, get under someone else, and I did that several times.
Josh,
I did that several times.
do
And
what you need to do.
right, you gotta do what you um and it was a heck of a lot of fun. Don't get me wrong, it was so much fun. But then there came a point where it's like, is that serving me? Is
Mhm.
me being with someone new all the time, is that serving me? And that's where I started to uh, process the loss of the relationship. I started to figure out, clearly define who it is, what it is that I want in my life. And in the past year, I've started to uh, be more intentional about dating, about relationships. And then, of course, I decided to move countries, not just to the next
Just
door
pack it
country,
all
but
together, right?
nine
Add it on.
nine time zones away from South Africa. And so, yeah, I've been prioritizing connection over physicality. And I think that has been something that's really fulfilling, pretty daunting, because doing that now in your mid 40s is not something I had anticipated. The extent of my love for my ex was where we both thought we would grow old together. So to say that I expected to be in this kind of situation here right now is a complete
Mhm.
fallacy. I thought I would grow old with my ex. And, these are the things that you make peace with as you grow older. So that's been some of my experiences over the past few years.
So, I mean, there's so much there, right? And I remember, again, going back a few years, you and your ex had bought a house and you had a dog that you guys loved so much and you were always at the park. And I
Yeah.
mean, from the outside looking in, it was like a marriage. I
Mhm.
remember you would post these beautiful pictures on WhatsApp, and I'd always zoom to see the decor in the background because you were always just so on point, right? So when I'd heard the two of you were no longer together, it did take me aback because I just think to myself, and again, it's like a marriage. You have
Mhm.
these two people that you meet, they've grown up together, there's identity that's shaped over those
Yeah.
years, and now that relationship is no more. But I think what's so powerful in terms of your discussion is going back to your age, speaking about how impressionable you were. And I think it's the power of hindsight, right? It's what we think we want and love at that time. And there's an absolute season for it because those
Yeah.
people teach you so much about yourself and you get to
Mhm.
grow. Versus you later on in life looking back and you have a much clearer idea of
Yeah.
what you're okay to compromise on,
Yeah.
where the boundaries lie, and expectation. Part of your previous discussion though is you did speak about just the compromise of self, and now later on almost reformulating that identity. Could you chat to us about what some of those compromises were? Because that for me was such a critical part of our conversation last week,
Mhm.
is just this symbolism of compromising in your 20s, compromising in your 30s,
Yeah.
potentially compromising your values in those 3 years, right? Like cocktails fun, here we
Yeah.
go. And then getting to a space of but I know what I'm worth and I know what
Yeah.
I want. And now I'm not going to compromise on that.
Yeah. So, where do I begin when it comes to compromise? Because there were so many things. But you know, so let me open you up to the gay experience. And so, for your audience, who I imagine there's not a heck of a lot of gay men in your audience,
I
so
don't know. You never know.
you'll never know. Let me break it down to you in a way that can be very crude, but it's the reality of the gay experience. Gay men would identify as top, which means you are the in the sexual aspect, you're the one who penetrates your partner. A bottom, that means you are the one who's being penetrated. Or versatile, and that means you would be either a version. And then there's a new term that's become quite popular these days, and that means aside. Aside means you simply don't do any of those things. And being a young and impressionable gay man, remember I said that was my first relationship. I also grew up in a very conservative family, so that means I didn't have very many sexual experiences. Even when it came to things like alcohol, I only really had alcohol when I was like 22 years old, which, in South Africa is almost unheard of. So I had very latent experiences. And again, being very impressionable, I absorbed like a sponge everything that was around me. And so when I got into this relationship, I had to follow his lead. And so part of his lead was, oh, he's a top. And so I thought, okay, well, that sounds cool. I guess then I'll be the bottom in the relationship. And I didn't have the wherewithal to question that. I had my own insecurities. I had insecurities about my body. I had insecurities about how feminine I was. And here's this man who has a beautiful body with a six pack, who is fairly masculine within the gay community. And I thought I had hit the jackpot. So who am I to question his lead? And so that's where the insecurities come in, is that I didn't feel like I had the strength nor the power to be in a position to say, actually, this is not working for me. And so I compromised on that, and I compromised on that for 13 years. It took the end of that relationship for me to realize that I am not a bottom, that sexually I want something a lot more inclusive and a lot more diverse in my sexual experience. It took me having that whole phase for 3 years to realize that I don't associate with that label. But I was not in a position to feel safe. I didn't feel safe, and it's not purely his fault. It's part of that is my responsibility, and I take ownership for that. Is because I didn't have the confidence nor the self-worth to articulate what my needs, my desires was. Um, and so again, I don't put that on him. I put that on me because I needed to do that work. Whether that work needed to be done on my own or in partnership with him, the reality is I didn't have the strength and the courage to do that work in a way that created a meaningful change in our relationship. Um, and so that was part of how I had to compromise and how that compromise led to a 13-year vacuum of um, my sexual expression. And I really don't want to give you the idea that we had an unfulfilled sex life. We had a great sex life. It's just that it was mostly on his terms. Um, and it was in a way that I didn't know how to express my sexual needs or my sexual desires in a way that I felt safe to do so. Yeah.
I think that comes through in homosexual relationships and I mean, in all relationships, right?
Mhm.
In heterosexual relationships, where I think you get into a space with your partner and there's this yin and yang,
Yeah.
and somewhere along the line, we almost lose parts of ourselves
Hmm.
to accommodate our partner.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting because I've been speaking to more and more women lately
Hmm.
who have spoken about this reawakening of sexuality and what they let go of themselves in their relationship. And now, post divorce, have a far better idea of, so let me correct that, not a far better idea. They have to do the work to
Yeah.
understand where they're at in terms
Right.
of themselves as a human being, as a woman, in terms of what they want from the relationship, but also sexually.
Yeah.
What does that sexuality mean? What is my love language? Do
Hmm.
I just love it when you sit next to me because
Yeah.
my partner used to be out and about and I had to do that and I never
Yeah.
felt fulfilled?
Hmm.
So for me, it's always just such an interesting dynamic of, I think it's self awareness, so what you learn about yourself as you navigate relationships. But I do think after a breakup, there's this, we say hard stop for meetings, right? But there's a hard stop within ourselves
Yeah.
where we're forced to just take a step back and
Hmm.
reflect on what we love and what we don't love and what
Yeah.
we want and what we don't want
Yeah.
anymore. Those
Yeah.
boundaries.
Yeah.
Given where you're at and given this growth that you've had, right? How are you approaching relationships differently today versus
Hmm.
the 25-year-old version of yourself?
So boundaries is probably the biggest one. And also being brutally honest about what I want and what I don't want.
Mm-hmm.
So right now I'm dating someone um, who is really just one of the sweetest guys. But he also has, so he's younger than I am. He's 30 years old, which means he's 13 years younger than I am. But, the thing about someone at that age is that I think back to myself that people pleasing, he has that and he wants to always do things that makes me happy, which I love. But I also challenge him on it. Is he doing that because he wants to make me happy or because it makes him feel good about doing something? Um, so the way in which I'm approaching things now is more intentionality, having a great idea about what I want, what I don't want, and also being open to the possibilities. I remember when I was younger, I thought I had a type. And we all say, oh, I have a specific type, they have to do this, they have to do that. I had to actively dismantle that mentality after my relationship ended. Because what is a type? Why do we say we have this type? And I realized that it was not serving me, that I was blocking um, connection with people who could be valuable beyond a physicality. Whether that physicality is age, whether that physicality is body type, whether that physicality is cultural background. I had to actively question my thinking about that. And that's one of the things that's led me to some of the best experiences post my long term relationship. I have connected with people on a meaningful level as well as a sexual level um, of all ages, of all ethnicities, and developed friendships, lasting bonds as a result of that, only because I started to be more open to experiences as opposed to this is my type and I'm not going to stray from that lane. That's been one of the biggest lessons as well.
So, I mean, while you're speaking, I'm just hearing belief systems, right? And the belief systems that we're raised with, the belief systems in our community, and even the belief systems we put on ourselves. Like, I have
Hmm.
a type, this is what I stand for, this is what I think I should stand for.
Yeah.
And I had such a beautiful podcast with Dr. Suzanne Vickberg 2 weeks ago. And what I loved about her is that she challenges the status quo. And
Hmm.
she says, if someone gives you advice, challenge it.
Yeah.
Take what you need from it and challenge it.
Yeah.
If someone gives you an answer or you think you need to do something, challenge it. Ask why. Why do I need to do this? And
Yeah.
that for me was just this breath of fresh air because we don't challenge things enough.
Hmm.
Who said you need to have a type, right?
Yeah.
We put that on ourselves. And I think when we break these boundaries and barriers that we almost put around ourselves, our
Yeah.
relationships, our
Yeah.
friends, our communities, that's when you have these aha.
Right.
incredible moments, and you open yourself up to
Yeah.
experiences and friendships and people. And yeah, it's just beautiful.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. And I think that has been my overarching philosophy throughout my entire life, challenging the status quo, whether that is how I present myself, whether that is how I show up in the workplace. I always believe that we should challenge what the status quo is. And that has served me so incredibly well throughout my life, both professionally and personally, because when we just accept things for what they are without truly interrogating that in a way that helps us to understand, societal structures, things like marriage. Who says you have to be married to have a fulfilled relationship? Who says you have to cohabit with someone to have a fulfilled relationship? So this is
That's
one of the
interesting.
this is one of the conversations I'm having with the 30-year-old, who shall not be named right now, but the 30-year-old, so we have a couple of flirty conversations and a couple of serious conversations. And one of the serious conversations was when he introduced me to his friends, and I said it very matter of factly, I don't think I could live with anyone again. And this is the honest to God truth, and we've had already had this conversation, and he had shocked face emoji all over his reaction. He could not.
So were you
un-
guys texting, or is
no,
that like shock face
no,
emoji in front of you?
yeah, we're having dinner with his friends, and I say this, and his one friend was really sweet and backed me up, said, I'm listening to a podcast, or I read a book that said that can really work and that can be very healthy and all of that. So she was so sweet. And then my 30-year-old was like, how does that work? No, this can't work. And I also tell him, like, I also am ridiculously neat and tidy. Yeah, it's to a point where it would annoy most people, and I completely understand that, and I own it, and I don't apologize for it. So I don't want to subject other people to my hyper tidiness because I know how ridiculous I am. But at the same time, I don't want to live with someone who's untidy. So
Is
solution
that
for
a
me
hard stop?
is, the solution for me is just don't live together. We'll have date nights, we'll have great times and fun together, but I don't want to fight about is the laundry next to the basket or in the basket. I think there's bigger things to worry about. So yeah, those are just some of the things that make me laugh these days.
It's just phases of life, right? Because I remember after my divorce, I loved my own little space. I would burn my
Mm,
candles at
yeah.
night, and I didn't have to check in terms of can I put this decor here? I
Yes.
could just do what I wanted to
Of
do, right?
course.
And I
Yeah.
set up our home so
Yeah.
beautifully for my daughter and I. And fast forward years later, Tristan and I are now talking about moving in together. And Joash, the first week, him and his son moved in, right? And I remember standing in the shower and I looked down at the Nivea Man body wash and I was just like, I don't know if this belongs here. Like, what is this? There are boys in my house. And you go through this phase again, right?
Yeah.
Of what are the healthy compromises? What are
Hmm.
the healthy boundaries?
Yeah.
What do I expect from you? So, like Tristan knows now, if I just give him the look, he knows, please pick up the washing that is lying next to the basket. That should be in the basket. But I mean, again, it's this yin and yang, and you figure it out. And there's definitely a space for readiness. And I think when I
Yeah.
hear you talk, like you've done so much healing and you focused so much on yourself over the last 3 years, right? It's okay that you might not be in a space right now to share your space with someone else.
Hmm.
Whether it's now, whether it's in a year time, whether
Yeah.
it's never ever, and your 30
Yeah.
year old is going to have to figure this out too, right? Um, but I think for me, something that's coming through in all of my podcasts consistently is being kind to yourself, owning your truth, and knowing what you're okay with. And you'll
You're right.
get to those points, but don't force yourself, which
Yeah.
I just think is stunning. And I think you're there.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
In terms of your healing journey, so I mean, you and I both come from a world of well-being, employee
Yeah.
assistance programs. So it's something that we believe in. We've
Hmm.
seen it work. And I think we're almost more prone to putting our hand up and saying, I do want help. I want to see a coach or I want to see a
Yeah.
psychologist. But some people's belief systems, again, stop
Hmm.
them from taking that step.
Right.
What was your journey of healing?
So, like you said, I've been privileged to work in this industry for a long time. And I cannot underestimate and undersell the value of mental health and having people, professionals, to support you through difficult times. There's been several times throughout my life for different reasons that I've
Mhm.
um, sought help. And I think the great thing about workplace programs is that it gives you the ability to get help for something that may seem fairly mild, such as going through a bump in your relationship, or something that may be a lot more a lot more intense, such as someone who's struggling with anxiety or living with depression, all of which are challenges that people face on a regular basis. So for me, when I went through a bump in my relationship, um, the first thing I did was see a therapist. And when I moved here through to Seattle, not enough people talk about how hard a transition is from one country to
I
another.
imagine. Yeah.
And the first 3 months that I was here was incredibly difficult because I had given up a vibrant and phenomenal life that I had in Johannesburg, a life that I had built up over 20 years of living there in Johannesburg. And to come to a country that is not just foreign, I had no friends here, and I had to start from scratch in my 40s. And so that became incredibly difficult. It came, it was basically going into mourning. It was a period of grief for the old
Absolutely.
life, and then trying to figure out how do I build a new life. And I saw a therapist who really helped me to contextualize what I was going through. And one of the things that he said, which will never leave me, is I was telling him about how I'm an eternal optimist, which I am. I'll always see the glass half full. And but I also balance that with being a realist. It's not like I have just this Disney World lens of how I see things. I do balance it with trying to be realistic. But I was telling him how being an eternal optimist, how difficult it was to feel the feels of that,
Mhm.
that grief and almost a level of sadness and depression. And he was then telling me about his experience and how he's actually an eternal pessimist and how he is always waiting for something to fall apart in life and in general. And I told him, I said, oh my God, that must be so exhausting being an eternal pessimist. And he says, well, isn't it exhausting to be an eternal optimist? And Chantal, that was my aha moment.
Mirror.
It really was. It really was because I realized that in being the eternal optimist, that I was putting this weight on my shoulder to expect there to be a silver cloud without acknowledging a silver lining, rather, without acknowledging that the cloud is actually there. And
Mm.
so the lesson that I got from there was sometimes you've just got to sit in your feelings. You've got to feel what you're feeling without expecting it to get better, even if it is going to get better. But you just sometimes got to acknowledge this is fucking hard. I hate
Yeah.
it. And I'm miserable right now. You've got to sit in it. You've got to own it. Rather than it's going to be better tomorrow. Maybe it will be better tomorrow, but right now I need a tub of ice cream to help me get through this.
Yeah.
And that was the lesson that I learned. And I think I would not have got to that point without therapy. And it sounds frivolous, right? That I had someone tell me that. But that was the thing that got me through that period. And having someone who sat outside of my community,
Mhm.
outside of my social network, to listen to me, to show empathy, but also to hold me accountable to my own bullshit, was something that I needed at that time. And so I'll always be an advocate for therapy. We know that therapy looks differently from country to country. There's all of these different nuances and things, but to find someone who you can confide in, who is not part of your world, is really something
Yeah.
that is valuable and special.
And I think for me, it's also embracing that space of vulnerability with that stranger. Because
Hmm.
to put your hand up and say, I don't have this figured out, and I'm
Yeah,
really hurting, and I don't know how to fix it, that in itself is a first step. And that could also be belief systems people need to navigate through. But I am a massive advocate, as you,
yeah,
of just getting that help, having that soundboard is so, so, so
yeah.
important. So, friend, in terms of maybe us ending off our podcast, which I've just loved so much, by the way, what advice would you give to people who have maybe been in those long relationships where things haven't worked out the way you wanted to, whether it's ended up in a divorce or a breakup, and about almost just pulling yourself back towards yourself and moving on? What
Yeah.
would your words of wisdom be?
Oh my gosh. It's hard. There is no two ways about it. I remember in those first few months after the breakup, you go through all the emotions, rage, um, you know, and I was,
Denial.
my goodness, all of it, right? And Chantel, I was not on social media at that time when we broke up, and I haven't been on social media for a while.
Yes,
You
I
know that.
remember.
Yeah, and I only recently joined social media once again. But I am so glad I was not on social media because the things I would have fucking posted had I been on, I would have regretted to this day. So I'm glad those thoughts stayed in my head and did not get transposed to any kind of digital footprint. Oh my God. No, that would have been horrific.
It
So
could have
that's
been
one thing.
cathartic.
Yeah, cathartic and fucking embarrassing. Because, people always want to know your business, and I'm glad I didn't let them. So that's the one piece of advice: stay away from social media after a breakup. But I think the bigger piece is just feel yourself, be kind to yourself, and allow yourself to feel new feelings, allow yourself to feel new experiences, and don't think that you have to go back into that same routine, or that you have to meet someone who is the replica of your ex.
Yeah.
You have a new slate. Use all the colors in your coloring box to color that.
Oh,
There are no rules. There's simply no rules. You can make it up, and you can make it up at 25, at 35, 45, 55, at any age. I think this idea that we are over the hill at whatever age is absolute nonsense. You look at some of the greatest people who've done great things in the world, they've found their ambition and drive in life sometimes very late. You look at
mhm,
um, Toni
mhm.
Morrison, you look at some truly phenomenal people who have done things in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. Look at Jane Fonda right now. She's in
Yeah.
her 80s and is still working. So I think we tend to ring fence ourselves to believing that success can only happen when we're young. Success can happen at any stage of life. We've just got to embrace it.
Use every color in your coloring in box. I'm going to end with that. Just love it. Fern, thank you for your energy. Thank you for your honesty. Thank you for upskilling me. There was a lot there I didn't know. And I
I'm pretty
really
sure
wish
your
you all the
audience too.
best. 100%. Watch all the ratings go straight up, like and subscribe. Please keep us posted on your 30-year-old and how the
I will.
relationship goes. And I would love to have both of you on the podcast, so keep me posted.
He's a lot more shy than I am. He won't speak a lot.
Okay.
He's also
Okay.
a therapist, so that may be an
Well,
interesting
we'll just have
concept.
you back then. You can give us the updates. But
Thanks,
thank you so,
Chantal.
so